Does anyone even logic?
When Gorsuch went up and spoke to a Democratic senator, we covered in depth the fact that Gorsuch had said something that actually endeared him to Democrats, and that actually a lot of establishment Republicans appreciated, and it actually, many people thought, tempered Gorsuch, or at least revealed him as they felt to be a moderate that they think he is. I mean, how are we covering this in a negative way, maybe a nuanced way? Or Donald Trump goes to the African American History Museum and he talks about countering bigotry, and we cover that as well.
Yes, you did cover that. So that's one of two of hundreds of stories, most of which are extremely negative. And God bless you for doing that positive stuff. But look at the way they slammed him for not covering right immediately the desecration of the Jewish cemetery outside St. Louis. I mean, this is a guy, and look at the way the media is endlessly playing him up as an anti-Semite. This is a guy who has a Jewish son-in-law, whose own daughter converted to Judaism, who's never been quoted saying a single anti-Semitic word, and they're constantly slamming him as being a racist or a white supremacist or something without any evidence of it at all. I think, with the greatest respect, and I appreciate your pointing out things where I was mistaken, but with the greatest respect, this is a guy that they're just smearing all the time. I don't blame him for wanting to fire back at them. If he were as smooth as Ronald Reagan, he would handle it more smoothly. But no one, again, will ever be as smooth as Ronald Reagan.
You said you think the press is trying to do to him what they did to Richard Nixon.
Yes.
So give us your perspective on that, because a lot of people look at what happened to Richard Nixon and they say, I mean, what Richard Nixon did to himself. The tapes from the Oval Office showed that 6 days after the Watergate break-in, he was discussing himself. He was discussing a cover-up. You know, the smoking gun tape. I mean, how did the media do that to Richard Nixon?
The media picked one tiny little thing that he did. One tiny little thing he did.
What tiny little thing?
One tiny little thing he did, which is just to discuss a cover-up. He didn't do the cover-up. They didn't follow through with the cover-up payments that he discussed. They just discussed it. This was a guy who brought more peace to the world than any president in the 20th century. Open relations with China. First strategic arms limitation talks with the Soviet Union and leading to an agreement. Ended the war in Vietnam. Brought home the prisoners of war. Saved the life of the state of Israel. And so
you think the Watergate scandal and what was uncovered was phooey?
It was not a good thing. Shouldn't have done it, obviously. But compared with his achievements, nothing. And I think they're doing the exact same thing to Mr. Trump, whose achievements, by the way, compared with Nixon, are nil. But I think they're trying to do the same thing. They're trying to undo him basically before he even gets started.
Okay. Are you?
I wouldn't argue that. No.
Okay. So let's say
I would argue, for instance, that you know, Fred Phelps very severely
with 12 members of the Westboro Baptist Church, and what they say is faggot. In Iran, you get thrown off a rooftop.
I do not think Jerry Falwell, and I think a lot of Christians would take.
Hold on. Okay, so let me make my point that I was making before you did this. Okay, the baseline. The jumping off point, Jesus, right? Okay, Jesus. Okay, Jesus never killed somebody. Jesus never beat his wife. Jesus never advocated to beat your wife. Jesus never caused a war. Jesus never beheaded anyone. Jesus never called for the killings of Christians and Jews. Jesus never established even a form of law. Muhammad did all of those things. So could we agree that Muhammad himself would be a radical fundamentalist that we would both have a problem with?
Listen.
I am here to ask you a simple question. I know that we portray Islam and all Muslims as bad, but there's 1.8 billion Muslim followers of Islam. We have 8 million plus Muslim Americans in this country, and I don't see them represented here. But my question is, how can we fight an ideological war with weapons? How can we ever end this war? The jihadist ideology that you talk about, it's an ideology. How can you ever win this thing if you don't address it ideologically?
Great question. I am so glad you're here, and I am so glad you brought that up because it gives us an opportunity to answer. What I find so amazing is since the beginning of this panel, which we are here about Benghazi attack against our people, not one person mentioned Muslims. We are here against Islam, or we're launching war against Muslims. We are here to discuss how 4 Americans died and what our government is doing. We were not here to bash Muslims. You were the one who brought up the issue about most Muslims, not us. And since you brought it up, allow me to elaborate with my answer. There are 1.2 billion Muslims in the world today. Of course, not all of them are radicals. The majority of them are peaceful people. The radicals are estimated to be between 15 to 25%, according to all intelligence services around the world. That leaves 75% of them peaceful people. But when you look at 15 to 25% of the world Muslim population, you're looking at 180 million to 300 million people dedicated to the destruction of Western civilization. That is as big of the United States. So why should we worry about the radicals, 15 to 25%? Because it is the radicals that kill. Because it is the radicals that behead and massacre. When you look throughout history, when you look at all the lessons of history, most Germans were peaceful. Yet the Nazis drove the agenda. And as a result, 60 million people died. Almost 14 million in concentration camps. 6 million were Jews. The peaceful majority were irrelevant. When you look at Russia, most Russians were peaceful as well. Yet the Russians were able to kill 20 million people. The peaceful majority were irrelevant. When you look at China, for example, most Chinese were peaceful as well. Yet the Chinese were able to kill 70 million people. The peaceful majority were irrelevant. When you look at Japan prior to World War II, most Japanese were peaceful as well. Yet Japan was able to butcher its way across Southeast Asia, killing 12 million people, mostly killed with bayonets and shovels. The peaceful majority were irrelevant. On September 11th in the United States, we had 2.3 million Arab Muslims living in the United States. It took 19 hijackers, 19 radicals to bring America down to its knees, destroy the World Trade Center, attack the Pentagon, and kill almost 3,000 Americans that day. The peaceful majority were irrelevant. So for all our powers of reasons and us talking about moderate and peaceful Muslims, I'm glad you're here. But where are the others speaking out? And since you are the only Muslim representative, in here, you took the limelight instead of speaking about why our government, and I assume, are you an American? You're an American citizen. So as an American citizen, you sat in this room, and instead of standing up and saying a question or asking something about our 4 Americans that died and what our government is doing to correct the problem, you stood there to make a point about peaceful, moderate Muslims. I wish you brought 10 with you to question about how we can hold our government responsible. It is time we take political correctness and throw it in the garbage where it belongs and start calling it.
All of our best debates are always about policy, and it should be about policy that affects women specifically. The Romney campaign wants to talk about women and the economy. The women in this country still make 77 cents on the dollar for what men make. So if women don't make less than men?
Actually, if you start looking at the numbers, Rachel, there are lots of reasons for that.
Wait. Well, don't tell me the reasons are. Do women make less than men for doing the same work?
No, because...
Wow.
Well,
okay.
Well, for example, men work an average of 44 hours a week. Women work 41 hours a week. Men go into professions like engineering, science, and math that earn more. Women want more flexible
professions. Listen, this is not a math is hard.
No. Yes, it is, actually.
No, it isn't.
Well,
No, listen.
All right, let Rachel frame it, though, the way you
right now,
laid it out.
women are making 77 cents on the dollar for what men are making.
But that's not true. If so, every greedy businessman in America would hire only women, save 25%, and be hugely profitable.
I feel like this is actually, I mean, it's weird that you're interrupting me, not letting me make my point, because we get along so well, so let me make my point.
I will.
But it is important, I think, the interruption is important, I think, because now we know, at least from both of your perspective, that women are not faring worse than men in the economy, that women aren't getting paid less for equal work. I think that's a serious basis, a difference in factual understanding of the world. But given that some of us believe that women are getting paid less than men for doing the same work, there is something called the Fair Pay Act. There was a court ruling that said the statute of limitations, if you're getting paid less than a man, if you're subject to discrimination, starts before you know that discrimination is happening, effectively cutting off your recourse to the courts. You didn't know you were being discriminated against, you can't go. The first law passed by this administration is the Fair Pay Act, to remedy that court ruling. The Mitt Romney campaign put you out as a surrogate to shore up people's feelings about this issue after they could not say whether or not Mitt Romney would have signed that bill. You're supposed to make us feel better about it. You voted against the Fair Pay Act. It's not about whether or not you have a female surrogate. It's about policy and whether or not you want to fix some of the structural discrimination that women really do face that Republicans don't believe is happening.
It's policy, is the argument.
It's policy, and I love how passionate you are. I wish you were as right about what you're saying as you are passionate about it. I really do.
That's
For
really
example,
condescending.
no,
I mean, this is a stylistic issue.
I'll tell you what.
My passion on this issue
Here's a fact.
is actually me making a factual argument on it. Alex?
May I share one fact with you? When you look at, for example, single women working in America today between the ages of, I think, 40 and 64, who makes more, men or women, on average? Men make $40,000 a year. Women make $47,000. When you take out the marriage factor, look at some economics. My point here is that we're manufacturing a political crisis to get away from what this election really wants to be about.
All right, well, let me bring...
And that's the Obama strategy in this election.
Come da porta picchita va bene, se tu la parla miezza americano, quando si fa l'amore sotto la luna, come da bene in capo di I love you, papà l'americano.